Hello there. Britain's Trade Secretary is pushing hard for the USA to reconsider its environmental subsidies. But will she be listened to? 3 years after the UK left the European Union, the EU, with Brexit, the country finds itself caught up in a looming transatlantic trade conflict between two economic giants. On the one hand, there's the USA, whose Congress in August did pass the Biden administration much vaunted 369 billion green subsidy program, part of the Inflation Reduction Act. On the other side is the EU, which fears Washington's subsidy offense will divert investment, particularly in electric vehicles from Europe, which should hit the auto industry hard. The EU is now preparing its own package of subsidy measures. Washington, on the other hand, is showing little sign of changing course. The fear of a trade war is growing. Britain, under the leadership of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, sits between the fronts as part of Europe, but no longer part of the EU, and can only watch, more or less passively, as things develop. The United Kingdom now risks being beaten up by both sides. That's how the political magazine Politico describes the tricky situation. It's not in the UK's interest for the US and EU to go down this route. That was said by Sam Lowe, an expert on UK-EU trade policy, and he was quoted by Politico. Given the current economic situation in Britain, it cannot afford to wage a subsidy war with both. The UK government had just embarked on a round of austerity measures earlier after months of political turmoil and a collapse in markets. The dispute over the Biden government's IRA has real costs for the British auto industry. The US is the second largest market for UK-made vehicles after the EU, and the automotive sector is one of the UK's top exporters. Manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover have publicly warned of the very serious challenges posed by the new US law and its electric vehicle tax credit plan to boost American industry. UK Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch has been urging senior US officials in semi-official meetings for months to introduce exemptions to mitigate the impact of EV subsidies on Britain. That's at least what Downing Street insiders report. When US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo visited London in early October, Badenoch urged her to reconsider US strategy. Badenoch has raised this issue on many levels, said an official at Britain's Department for International Trade. He referred to meetings with the US ambassador to the UK, Jane Hartley, and with members of the Biden administration and senior officials from both nations. But the UK is also facing problems from the EU. In response to Washington's plans, the EU is preparing billions of dollars in subsidies for its own industries hit by the US law, which also includes tax breaks to encourage US green companies like solar cell makers. So the UK can expect to be squeezed in both markets, but has no say no matter how Brussels or Washington reacts. Political observers in the UK believe Badenoch will find it difficult to persuade her US counterparts to act. The US hardly focuses on how its policies affect the UK, admitted a US-based representative of a major British corporate group. Although the UK and US are very close allies, Washington doesn't really see the UK as an interesting trading partner and market right now. The US is more focused on pushing China back, which means Badenoch has a lot of work to do to get the government to soften the IRA. Great Britain's room for maneuver thus appears to be very limited. Britain can consider legal action and drag the US before the World Trade Organization, so the WTO, or challenge the EU with provisions in the post-Brexit trade and cooperation agreement. But, as Sam Lowe said, to put it bluntly, neither of them cares what we have to say. In the economic dispute between USA and France, US President Joe Biden made a tough announcement to his French colleague Emmanuel Macron, but at the same time extended his hand. But there you can see what Britain has to expect. Macron has been on a state visit to the United States since Wednesday. In contrast to regular work visits, the effort involved in logging is much higher. The Frenchman is the first foreign guest in Biden's tenure to receive this honor in almost 2 years. However, the visit comes at a time of tension in transatlantic trade relations. Macron has sharply criticized US economic decisions, especially the anti-inflation law, the IRA, which Biden sees as one of the greatest successes of his term so far. The legislative package is, as I said, intended to boost US industry and favor it over foreign competitors. Subsidies and tax credits are linked to companies using US products or producing them themselves in the United States. At the start of his visit, Macron warned that the difference would be so great that many companies would no longer invest in Europe. The decisions made are decisions that will fragment the West, he said. At the joint press conference, Biden defended the general line of the law. It's about the US not wanting to rely on supply chains elsewhere. Europe has the same goal and can do the same. There are details that could be optimized, but there's no intention to exclude other countries. The intention was to make sure we didn't end up in a situation where a pandemic breaks out in Asia and then China decides to stop selling us computer chips, is what Biden said about this. Macron expressed hope for a common solution. Basically, we share the same vision and the same will. We want to be successful together, not against each other, he said. It's about a common strategy to create more industrial jobs, both in the US and in Europe, and to ensure the strength and resilience of supply chains. On other issues, the two presidents emphasized their unity, also with regard to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Today, we, France and the United States, along with all our allies, our NATO allies and the G7 countries, the European Union, reaffirm that we stand as strongly as ever against Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, said Biden. The United States and France would continue to work together to hold Russia accountable. But there you see, if the EU and the USA want to change something about their supply chains, Britain doesn't have a very good role here at the moment. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.